Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to Bold Carnivore. Today, I have an awesome special guest. It is Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Hello, Anthony Chaffee.
Hey, well, thank you very much. It's good to see you.
Awesome. Glad to have you on board. I just really wanted to meet up with you. You're one of my heroes, and
Oh, thanks.
you're one of the top names in this space, and I thought it would just be awesome to get some time with you.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. And yeah, happy to.
All right. So let's just jump right in.
Hmm?
Yeah, a little while back, I saw you on a video where you were talking about a traumatic head injury that you had suffered.
Okay.
Yeah. Could you give me a little bit more detail on that?
Oh, well, that was when I was getting ready to take my MCAT. So I was studying for my MCAT, or just about to start studying for my MCAT. And I was in an accident and I was unconscious for about a minute. And afterwards, I did not go to the hospital, which was really stupid. But I was um, having very, very bad headaches after that. I was having a difficult time concentrating, very bad headaches for, sort of a month to 6 weeks after that. I lost half my vocabulary. I had to relearn a lot of, the language and, grammar that I had known my whole life. And it was very difficult. Things like physics, I had to, go back over physics and things like that for the MCAT. And I was like, I remember doing this. I remember it being really easy. I have no idea how to do this. And it wasn't all that long departed. So it was difficult. And so I was like trying to study for the MCATs, and I remember feeling like it was thinking through mud. And so that was very difficult, but it took about a year, but I sort of recovered most of the way, pretty much most of the way. And then I was playing a rugby game again, and I crashed into my head and sort of lights everywhere. I lost vision in my left eye, and was pretty out of it, and got another concussion. Kept playing, and after that, like my vocabulary issues, my word finding issues came back again. So it was another struggle to get over that. And that was right when I was going to medical school. So bad timing all around. But well, I was able to recover. But it's not fun going through that sort of thing.
Wow. You lost the vision in your left eye?
Temporarily, yeah.
Which I didn't even hear that before, though. That is wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah. Well, the guy speared me right in the left temple and just smashed me. So I was diving into the tri-zone. And had a
Hmm.
tournament up in Canada, and it was sort of an international tournament. So we were playing. It was our Seattle team. Old Puget Sound Beach was the team then. Now it's joined up with the Seattle Saracens. So that's the team, and like Cerebri Sevens, they're all out of there now. But it used to be called Old Puget Sound Beach, and so we were actually playing other countries' national teams. So like the Kenyan national team was there. There were some representative sides from Canada and the West Indies. So we were playing the West Indies going into the semifinal with the Kenyans because we beat the West Indies, and that was sort of last try of the game. I was scoring that try that were won the game for us, and this guy just came belting in, just smashed me right in the side of the temple, and so we ended up winning the game, but I was completely out of it, and it took me a while to sort of recover from that. But I
Yeah.
played against Kenya too, though, so I was able to recover mostly. But it was like the vision issue was, it was only a few minutes, but it was all white and fuzzy out of my left eye. I could only sort of see out of my right eye, and then that sort of resolved in a couple of minutes.
Wow. Now, were you carnivore at the time, or were you not?
No, no, I wasn't doing carnivore at the time. Always very heavily meat based, but that was I was 29 at the time, so I had stopped being full carnivore 4 years earlier when I was 25,
Mm.
without really realizing it, because I wasn't, doing carnivore consciously. I just wasn't eating plants because I learned how toxic they were in college. And so I was just like, okay, I'm just not going to eat any of them. And so I defaulted into just eating meat and eggs. And I did that for 5 years and I never felt better in my life. And then sort of slipped off of that, but didn't realize that me not feeling like a superhero lined up with eating this other stuff. I didn't realize it had that big of an effect until much later. And when I sort of rediscovered all of this and got rid of all the plants, and then again felt like I was 22 again, and a superhero. So then I started really realizing how dramatic of an effect these things have on our bodies.
Mhm. Now, you said twice now that you just got rid of all those dang plants. Now, I've got some listeners out there, I'm sure they're going, what? Dr. Chaffee does not even eat plants. Why is it you would want to avoid eating plants?
Oh, just because we're not designed to eat plants. I mean, food is species specific, so all animals have to eat what's in their biological design. A food to a giraffe is not food to a lion, and it's not food to a gazelle even though giraffes and gazelles eat plants. So they eat different plants because they're biologically designed to eat certain plants. Because plants are stationary, they can't move away, run away, or fight back like an animal can. It's difficult to take down an animal and kill it, especially when it's large, has horns and hooves, and does not want you to kill it. So they'll fight back, and it can be difficult to take them down. But once they're down, their meat and flesh is the most bioavailable, nutrient-dense nutrition out there. A plant is on the opposite side of the spectrum. They can't run away. They're just sitting there like idiots, not even trying to run away. And so how do they defend themselves, right? Because of course they do, because they're under constant assault by animals and insects. And yet they're 99% of life on Earth are plants. And so they have to have defenses. And so their defense is not horns or teeth or claws or running really fast or flying. It's, there can be physical things like thorns, wood, bark, nuts protecting, big woody nuts protecting the seed inside. Trees grow up tall, trying to get away from things on the ground. But they also use poisons, toxins, chemicals, latex. We use latex in gloves, right? Doctors use latex gloves, and not the latex gloves, but the latex gloves come from latex, which is from a plant. It's like the sap from a plant, and that's a defense. So an animal starts chewing on this plant, chews on these leaves, starts secreting this latex, and then it actually glues their mouth shut. It's very tacky, and so it glues their mouth shut, and now they can't eat that plant anymore. It's a very elegant solution to stop an animal from eating you if you just glue their mouth shut, right? Problem for the animal is they usually die after this because they can't get their mouth open. They can't get it unglued. And so, but that is also elegant because now that animal is not going to have kids that will come and learn to eat that plant again. So that's one, but plants make about 1 million different chemicals. This is basic botany. They make 1 million different chemicals, most of which are defensive in orient. And so anyone who studies botany or really biology should know this, that this is how plants defend themselves. So, I mean, I learned this in 7th grade. Plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more toxic, so less and less animals can eat them, so they can survive and thrive. Anything that can't do that has gone extinct already. And then animals becoming more and more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants, so they can eat that plant and survive and thrive, and that becomes their dedicated food source. So that's why if any animal eats a plant, it eats very specific plants. And so if your species has not evolved to eat a specific plant, that plant is bad for you. And so just introducing plants really in the last 10,000 years for some populations isn't very long to adapt. We've had millions of years of eating meat, millions and millions and millions of years, really have been apex predators, primarily carnivorous for 2.5, 3 million years, right? Apex predators. What does that word mean? It's apex, top of the food chain. Okay, what is the food chain? It's animals, right? So an apex predator by definition is a carnivore. And if you are not eating plants, if you're not designed to eat a plant, then that plant can cause harm. These defense chemicals will harm you. We know this intuitively. You get lost in the woods and you run out of food. You can't eat just any random plant, right? Most plants will cause a lot of harm, make you sick, or even kill you. And so we forget that that also applies to spinach and lettuce and broccoli and all these other sorts of things, because they have these defense chemicals as well. And while we may not die from eating broccoli, that can kill other animals that tries to eat them. And smoking doesn't kill us in a day, but over decades, an accumulation of these toxins and this damage to your body will build up harm in your body. And the same thing comes from these defense chemicals. So I just don't eat any of them because we're not designed to eat any of them. And there are a lot of people that haven't even had agriculture in their evolutionary past besides in the last century. So the Native Americans, Native Australians, and other populations that have only been westernized very recently, they don't have any of these adaptations that other populations have had for 10,000 years. And there was a stark line 10,000 years ago, pre and post agriculture, where people all of a sudden were 5 inches shorter, had crooked, broken, nasty, rotten out teeth. Their jaws were smaller. They weren't getting their wisdom teeth necessarily. They had poor wound healing. Their brains were smaller. Their head was 11% smaller on average. Femurs were shorter, which is an indication of poor nutrition. They had signs of infections like tuberculosis up and down their spines and things like that. That just happened directly after agriculture, and it persisted. And so we're seeing that now in populations like the Native Australians, the Native Americans, who really just eating meat before, certainly before Europeans came around, but also were eating meat for hundreds of years during that time, and then only more recently became sort of more fully westernized and eating the garbage that we eat. And we even used to call it that. We used to call them Western diseases of the West, because native populations didn't get them. It was only people from the West. Well, when these native populations started eating the food of the West, they started getting the diseases of the West. And now they're getting a much higher prevalence, much higher rate, because they don't have that adaptation for 10,000 years. They've only been just thrown into this. So that's why I don't eat it. So even though I don't have too many really any medical issues to speak of, I don't want to develop any, and I don't want to I don't want to run suboptimally. I want to feel my best and perform my best at all time. And so I just want to eat what I'm designed to eat. So if you eat what you're designed to eat, your body will work the way it's designed to work, and it's much better than anyone has any idea that they could possibly feel.
Awesome. But what about fruit?
Mm-hmm.
Is fruit something you eat, or would you suggest eating it?
No, I don't. No, I don't eat fruit. I don't eat any plants. So my hard rule is no plants or fungus, no sugar or any sweeteners, nothing artificial. And that goes for sauces, seasonings, and drinks as well. So fruit, sure, you could say that, well, maybe people were eating fruit at some point, but what were those points? I mean, the stuff is in season for a couple weeks out of the year, and they're all little crab apples and things like that. Maybe there were some that were naturally more sweet, but most of the ones that we eat now have been engineered to be much more sweet than they normally would naturally. And so those aren't the fruit that our ancestors would have come across. And so, not the same thing. Sugar in high enough doses will cause harm. And so I don't really care for that. But one thing that sugar, fructose specifically, will tell you is that a fruit or a plant is more safe than other things, because that's why we think that fructose is the sweetest of the carbohydrates. The other ones are pretty mildly sweet. Well, if you're eating a lot of fructose, it is anyway. Like I drink milk and it just has lactose, which is glucose and galactose, and it tastes like ice cream to me now because it's very, very sweet. Whereas before it wouldn't taste sweet at all. Right? Because I'm used to eating sugar, which is very sweet. So that contrast grounds that out. But now I taste milk. I'm like, oh my God, that's so sweet. And so people think that we recognize fructose as much sweeter because we recognize it as safe. This is something that we can eat safely. It's not going to kill us, cause an acute reaction, make us very sick or die. And so we say, okay, well, this is safe. I can eat this. I can survive on this. I can get some calories and nutrition, and then I can go away and get my normal food. Fine. But those things aren't available year round generally. They're seasonal, and certainly during the Ice Age, they weren't there at all. So you don't need them, is my point. If you want them, that's fine. But the fruits that we're eating now have way too much sugar. So if you had some fruit 2 weeks out of the year, probably not going to do too much harm. But if you're eating fruit every single day and you're just taking in sugar all the time, I don't think that that's a great idea. And also you have to remember that the plant wants something to eat, the fruit, not necessarily you. The majority of fruit on Earth will still kill you. The majority of fruit is inedible. And so, we go through the woods and we see just little bulbs and things growing on a tree. That's fruit. That's not fruit that you want to eat, though, because it can cause a lot of harm. It can kill you. Most berries as well. So, when you're going through, you're just lost in the woods. You're not going to start eating random berries because they are mostly poisonous. And so that's a bad idea. That's a fruit. It wants something to eat it, not you. It wants you to stay the hell away because they co-evolve with certain animals generally. And so like different berries and fruits, they often evolve with birds. And so the birds eat this thing, they move it with their droppings, and they move it quite distantly. And some of these seeds will only germinate if they go through the digestive tract of specific birds. So an example of that would be the cassowary bird in the tropics here in Australia and elsewhere. And they eat about 150 varieties of fruit. Every single one will kill you. Every single one will kill every other animal besides the cassowary bird, because those seeds will only germinate if it goes through the digestive tract of a cassowary bird. And so it has to be very appealing to a cassowary bird and very, very toxic to anything else, because that's its baby. If that seed does not get eaten by a cassowary bird, if it gets eaten by anything else, it will not turn into a plant. So if a cassowary bird leaves an area, they actually, those plants will die out. So, you can eat some of the sweeter fruits if you want to. I don't think you need them. In fact, I know you don't need them because I haven't eaten them in 6 years. And, and our ancestors during the ice ages, they wouldn't have had access to these things. And you can't just eke out a living in an ice age. You either thrive or you go extinct. And we didn't only thrive, we dominated. We became the most dominant species on this planet. And we did so without the physical characteristics that would normally cause an animal to be dominant, like a T-Rex or a lion or a blue whale or something like that, some big, strong, powerful animal that no one can mess with. We didn't have that. So we had to use our brains and we had to use other sorts of things, but we became extremely viable and extremely successful. And we did so during ice ages when no fruit were available and we were just eating meat.
Given that most fruits are typically only safe for humans given about a couple of weeks out of the year, and that we don't have those natural fruits available to us anymore, given that they are all manipulated to some extent, or even in this case, a lot of them are genetically manipulated these days, it may be something to avoid completely.
Well, for me at least, I recommend that to people. And when I talk to people, they tend to do better on just meat and water. I know there's some people that like to add in fruit, and that's their prerogative. But I've spoken to a lot of people who feel better when they come off of it. There might be some people that say they feel better, with it, but sugar's a drug too. It's addictive. It makes you feel good like other drugs do. So, is it that sort of dopamine hit that's making you feel better, or is it actually improving your health? I don't know. But I do know that a lot of people that go and start using, sweet fruits and things like that, do have problems. And especially people with autoimmune issues or even avocado or other sorts of non-sweet fruits, tomatoes, they have problems. And also a lot of the fruit that we pick now, first of all, fruit is not absent of plant toxins. But when they're ripened on the plant, those toxins can go down, the ones that we can deal with. And so like an avocado will have different toxins like oxalates. But when it ripens on the tree, it will reduce that to a quarter, right? So what does that also mean? That means if you pick it early when it's still green, it's going to have 4 times the oxalates and other defense chemicals in it as well. And those don't go away if you just box ripen them. And there are studies with tomatoes showing the same thing. They have a lot of solanine and other sorts of defense chemicals because they're nightshades in the same family as belladonna and tobacco, right? Mm-hmm. So and this was something that was folk wisdom, was understood that like green tomatoes were poisonous. You don't eat green tomatoes; they're poisonous. People, oh well, that's just an old wives' tale. I can eat this and I don't die. I'm like, okay, eat 10 a day, or make that a major part of your diet going forward, and see how you do. You're not going to do too well. And that was the thing too. Traditionally people would vine ripen tomatoes, blanch them in boiling water, take the skins off, which is where a lot of the barrier protection is, because that's where the animals and insects are trying to penetrate in and eat, and take out the seeds, because the seed's a plant's baby, and that's what they want to defend more than anything. So that's generally where you find a higher concentration of toxins. So they take out the seeds, they take off the skin, they let it vine ripen, and that minimizes, or at least reduces significantly, the toxic load. And then so you can do better on that, make a pasta sauce or whatever. And that's a traditional way of making pasta sauce, is making it in that way. But there are studies showing that with tomatoes, if you pick them green, they don't actually detoxify, because they're going to be more toxic when the plant doesn't want to give it up. When those seeds aren't ready, then, and the plant's not ripe, then it says, I don't want anything to eat me. So it's going to be hard, and it's going to not taste good. And it's not going to be as sweet, if it is sweet, and it'll have more toxins. And so they're trying to protect those seeds. They're not ready yet. And then they're saying, okay, seeds are ready, have at it. If you pick it before it's ready, those toxins are still in there, and they don't actually go away on their own. The plant has to take them out, has to draw them out. And we don't get that. So all the fruit that we're getting now, we're all getting from stores. And, and so, I mean, look at all citrus. All citrus have something called furanocoumarins, which are a defense chemical, which reacts with UV light, hits the furanocoumarin, and they bind irreversibly to proteins and DNA and cause permanent damage. And if you get this on your skin in the sun, this can cause chemical burns. And if you're just eating this can make you, can harm you in other ways as well. This is why you can't take certain medications with grapefruit or grapefruit juice, because there are these furanocoumarins, which are toxic, and your liver's detoxifying them, and it takes certain enzymes to detoxify these defense chemicals. Well, those enzymes are also used to metabolize a number of different medications. And so now you're going to get either too much or too little of your medication if you run out of these enzymes, because they're either activating or deactivating your medications. And so if it's deactivating your medications, you don't have enough of them, you're going to build up a toxic load, right? That's not good for you. If it's activating them, you're not going to have enough to activate them, so you're not going to have a therapeutic load. So either way, you're not helping yourself. And so that's a demonstration of these toxins that are in fruit, right? Citrus has sugar. It's fruit, but it has defense chemicals as well. And now you pick those things green and then let them box ripen, and it's even worse. So, if you have your own garden and you have some vine ripened fruit and it doesn't bother you, have at it. But there are a lot of people that are bothered by it, and do have serious problems with it, and they do much better when they come off of it. Also, people that have been carb addicted, sugar addicted, that sticks around. And so, I mean, that's like telling someone, okay, just don't eat cake and ice cream and all that sort of stuff, but just have fruit and honey. Okay, so that's like putting someone on methadone, putting a heroin addict on methadone or something like that. Like, you're still keeping them addicted to the substance. And so, we're telling them to drink beer instead of vodka. It's like, but look, this is to an alcoholic. Like, you should just avoid this for some people. So some people, if they're in that situation, they'll have, fruit and honey and other sort of sweetener, or even just sweeteners, like artificial sweeteners, like stevia, that nasty stuff. And that'll trigger those cravings. And then they'll have a little bit more and a little bit more. And then I'll just have a cheat day. It's one away. Okay, do you have cheat days for cigarettes and alcohol and heroin? Probably just best not to do that, because you all week you're just craving the stuff, but you're not touching it. And then on one day a week, you indulge, and you generally go overboard because it's just your day. And then you re-addict yourself, and then you're addicted the whole next week, and you're just craving it the whole time. Eventually, if you get away from it, those cravings go away, and you just get on with your life. But if you just have a cheat day, then you're feeling those cravings all the time. And I wouldn't want to live like that anyway. And a lot of people don't suffer that too well. They either end up going, nope, I'm off this stuff completely, or they start throwing in an extra day and then a third day and then more days and then ice cream and Coca-Cola and Pepsi and pizza and things like that. And then they're back to square one, eating a whole bunch of garbage. So I think it's can be a slippery slope for some people as well.
Agreed. Very much agreed. Yeah. So yeah, I was on with Bart K, and he said the same thing about fruit and honey. He said it is hunter indicated. It says for it.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't think it's necessary. I do think that fructose and sugar is harmful, especially in the levels that people are eating them now. I mean, we were eating sugar. The average person in America had about 4 pounds of sugar in the late 1800s. Now it's like 160, 170 pounds of sugar a year, right? So what is that? Half a pound or so of sugar a day? I mean, how crazy is that? I mean, that's an insane amount of sugar. And so, you don't need it. You don't need any of it. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. Their entire civilizations, past and present, who have never eaten carbohydrates during their entire life, generation after generation after generation, and they're extremely healthy people and thriving in very difficult conditions. So, no, I don't think you need it anyway.
Yeah. What about I mean, we talked about some of the physical impact that it can have, but what about psychological impact? We know that it's a drug and it can be addictive, but what other psychological impacts can the plant toxins and or sugar have?
Well, that's a good question with the plant toxins, because there are a lot of people that find that they are extremely harmed in their mental state from eating these plant toxins. So even people that go keto. Now, keto has been shown clinically to improve most, if not all, mental health issues. So it's major depression, anxiety, OCD, bipolar, even schizophrenia. So Professor Chris Palmer at Harvard is a professor of psychiatry there, and he's showing that you can actually reverse schizophrenia by putting people on a ketogenic diet. Now, a carnivore diet is a ketogenic diet, or it is if you're just eating meat. And so that improves your mitochondria, and that improves the cellular function and metabolism of your cell and your body and your brain in particular. And so that can improve things. Now, there are people that go on a ketogenic diet, and that can help, but it's not getting rid of all their issues, and they still have major depression and anxiety. This is anecdotal. We don't have clinical trials like Professor Palmer has done on keto specifically, but people, famous examples of this, like Jordan Peterson, he was keto for a long time, reversed a lot of his issues. He was just eating fatty steaks and salads with his daughter, Michaela, and was feeling much better, fixed a lot of problems. But he still had extremely severe depression and anxiety, as he says. And his daughter had figured out, if you only eat meat, she doesn't have to take medications for her rheumatoid arthritis, which was extremely severe, and her depression. She was feeling much better. She said, "Hey, Dad, why don't you just give it a try? Try for 30 days. And so he was like, "All right, I can do anything for 30 days. In his words, he said, "You can hang out of a window by your fingers for 30 days. In the grand scheme of things in your whole life, if this is going to completely change your life, like, what's 30 days? And so he did it. And within sort of 3-4 weeks, his crippling anxiety and depression was gone. And he said, salad was doing this to me. It was very strange, right? Because, we know the mechanisms for carbohydrates doing this, because they can damage your mitochondria, and they can prevent your body from replacing and renumerating your mitochondria. So you have less mitochondria, and they're less effective because they're not being traded out and fixed and repaired. And that can cause serious problems, because it's not just creating energy for your cell. They actually move around your cell on the inside of your cell and like drop energy here to turn this thing on to do something, to send off a neurotransmitter and send this signal, go here to send another signal. And so if they're moving slow and they're not creating enough energy, they're a day late and a dollar short, and you get a wrong signal, and you're compounding that by up to 2 trillion neurons. in your nervous system. And, just compound that. And each one of these neurons can interact with 20,000 or 30,000 other cells and neurons. And so, you have a big problem if you're not sending those signals properly. And we see this. People have hallucinations and they don't know what's going on and they just feel miserable. And so you can undo a lot of that. Now, we do know that a lot of these plant toxins cause damage to the mitochondria. And so I think it's probably something related to that, where you have some sort of toxin that can damage these mitochondria. But I think there's something else, maybe, that if it's damaging the mitochondria or its energy function and dynamics acutely, maybe that's it. But there are some things, like if you eat these plants, like these different greens or whatever, even salads or things without carbohydrates, people can get acutely depressed and get bad anxiety. So there's something in there that's affecting our neurochemistry and likely disrupting the normal communication and function of our neurotransmitters in our brain. Don't know those mechanisms yet, but we see this in people, and we see it reverse in people when they come off of this. With the carbohydrate thing, that seems to be a direct issue with mitochondria. For mental health issues with keto, right? So carbohydrates, they just curtail the normal functioning of your mitochondria and your normal recycling and upkeep of your mitochondria. And so there are studies showing that on a ketogenic diet, after a few months, that people have on average 4 times as many mitochondria in their cells, and they're 4 times as effective, right? So you have a massive compounding of the effect of these mitochondria and the functionality of your brain.
That's amazing. I would have known that. But wow. All right. So do you think that, because I know that chronic fatigue has been an issue on the rise, and that most times doctors will say they have no idea what actually causes chronic fatigue. Now, I would think that might be a big indicator, right?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, if your cells are just not capable of making energy properly, they're not going to function properly, and you're not going to have energy. But that's the thing. We as doctors don't know what most things are caused by. I mean, ask a normal doctor what causes diabetes. I mean, we don't know that. There's always like idiopathic this. Idiopathic means I have no idea. That's Latin for I have no idea. And so that's what doctors say. Well, that's idiopathic, whatever. And so we don't have a lot of answers for a lot of these things. But that's what I argue, is that I think this comes down to we're eating the wrong things. We're eating something that we're not designed to eat, and it's causing harm, either directly through these plant toxins that are doing their level best to disrupt our biology, anatomy, and physiology in order to stop us from eating that plant, either through making us very sick, not being able to reproduce because it absolutely tears the hell out of your hormones, and your even phytohormones and things like that can disrupt your hormones that mimic estrogen and testosterone and things like that, completely unbalance your hormonal system in both men and women. And so there are things that can cause direct issue or indirectly, just by not being as nutritious, having bioavailable nutrients, not having everything that we need, like we get from meat, carbohydrates, raising insulin, that disrupting our hormonal structure and our metabolism and making it so we can't go through autophagy, mitophagy, recycle these old cells, recycle these organelles inside the cells, because you can trade out the parts as well in these cells. You don't have to dump the whole cell. You can trade out the parts. So if your car, its muffler goes out, you don't have to just get a new car. You can just replace the muffler, right? And so your cells do that too. But if your insulin's elevated chronically, then it shuts down those processes. Anytime all of your hormones basically interact with other hormones, and they can all have a big cascade. And so insulin is a major, major one, and it can interfere with leptin, which is a very major and crucial hormone in your body as well. So all of these things have a lot of interplay. And so when you get these out of balance, a lot of other things start getting out of balance as well. So It's very important to get that right. And so we don't have, it's not taught in medical schools what these things are caused by, but I think it's very clear that it's from the food we're eating. We're eating the wrong food, we're getting directly poisoned, or we're lacking the appropriate amount of nutrition that will keep us healthy.
Considering nutrition and keeping us healthy, and our focus ought to be on what is most nutrient dense, that'd be meat. I would think that would be very clear, personally, but it may not be clear to everyone, especially people in power, and they're making power decisions such as, well, you can't farm now, or hey, wait a minute, too much farming, cut it back. What's your idea on that? What is your opinion about it?
Well, I think that, as Thomas Sowell said, the economist, historian and philosopher, and just brilliant man, he said, it's really a bad idea to allow people to make decisions who pay no price for the consequences of that decision. So if things go wrong, they have nothing affects them. It doesn't matter. And worse yet is letting people make decisions that when they make a bad decision for everyone else, they profit from it. Right. And that's unfortunately where we're at now. But, you have politicians saying, hey, we need to shut down these farms. We need to shut down these things. We need to put these policies in place. But those policies don't affect them. They don't affect that politician. And people say, well, they won't get voted back in. Yeah, that's probably not true. These people keep getting voted back in on both sides of the aisle, on whatever political spectrum you're in. There are people on the other side of your political spectrum that have been in power for 40 years. Some of these people, decades anyway. And so they can stay in power. They generally just deny that what they did was a bad idea, even though it's hurting everyone. And they just say, no, we just didn't do it hard enough. We didn't do it enough. We needed more funding, and those people didn't allow it to come through, and all these sorts of things. But the fact of the matter is that they don't pay any price for a wrong decision. That's the whole idea of liberty in the first place. The American experiment was that you get to decide your own life. You get to make your own decisions, and no one's going to live your life more carefully than you will. Now, you're not going to make perfect decisions every time, and you shouldn't, because that's how you learn. Like you ask Jeff Bezos or any of these very successful people, they said they made far more mistakes than they made right choices, but they learn from their mistakes. That's how we work. We learn from our mistakes. We do that. We try. It's trial and error, trial, error, trial, error, trial, error, trial, error. Got it. Right. And that's how things work. So, the idea that it's like, oh, well, we just don't want anybody making a mistake ever. Not going to happen. Never going to happen. And you trying to decide what 7 billion people, 8 billion people should be doing. How can you do that with one blanket policy? What's right for you is not going to be right for me in every circumstance, and vice versa. So when it lands on the person, at least if you make a bad decision, it'll bite you in the ass. And so you are going to be less likely. You're going to be, oh, okay, I need to be really careful about this and really weigh this out, because it's going to affect me negatively. Now, some people don't care. That's their prerogative. They are not a slave. They are not a child, unless they are a child. And then you have your parents. But, the government's not a parent. They make very bad parents. And, so I think that's a bad idea. So the more that the government gets involved in people's life, the less choice we have, the less freedom we have. And so people think, well, that's fine. We'll get away with free speech, because some people are saying things that I really don't like. They're just really nasty things. Okay, well, what if the people that get in power don't like the things you say? Right? And think that what you have to say is really bad, and that you're a very bad person for having said it. And there are people going to jail now in England, of all places, for saying things,
Yeah.
and for having opinions. When you control speech, you control thought. And so that's a very, very dangerous road to go down, and one that is protected by the very First Amendment in the American Constitution. It was in the Bill of Rights. It just said, this is the big one. And people are trying to get rid of that, because if you are a totalitarian, would want to be dictator, you need to control people. That's the whole game plan, is controlling people, enslaving them, and being in charge of them. And the best way to do that is to be able to control their thoughts and their speech, and tell them, you have to say something. You're not allowed to say that. You have to say this other thing that you know for a fact is false. So this is where George Orwell's book 1984 comes in. He talks about this phenomenon. And as Theodore Dalrymple said, it's just a UK doctor who's written a bunch of books. It's a pen name. That's not his real name. But he said that this sort of behavior is designed to control your thought, control your speech. When you start saying things that you know are not true, then you have lost your all sense of probity, and you will not be able to distinguish fact from fiction, and you'll just sort of go along with anything. And this is a tactic used by the communist totalitarians and would-be communist radicals, and to control thought, which controls speech, which controls actions, and controls people, and you end up enslaving people through their minds, and as opposed to just doing it through force of arms. And of course, you get in power, and then you have the force of arms as well. So it's a very, very, very bad road to go down.
Yeah, all of that because we were talking about how to keep eating meat.
Well, it all goes together, I mean, it's all about freedom and people making the decision to live their own life. And if I find that, or anyone finds that they're sick and they're unhealthy and they're unhappy eating what they're being told by, their parents, the government says, oh, this is what you should eat. Here's the food pyramid. This is what you should eat. This is the food plate. This is what you should eat. And you're getting sick and you're getting fat and you're miserable and you're unhappy. And then you have the choice to say, okay, I'm going to try something else. And then you try that something else and you feel much better. But now you have people saying, no, 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 that's not good for you. You're not allowed to have that. And you're too small and little and weak and stupid to make your own decision. And so we'll do it for you. And also you're destroying the environment, you're destroying the world, and you're killing animals and these poor fluffy creatures and all these sorts of things. And it's just like, so there's a serious measure of control here. And so when people get away from that, all of a sudden they're healthy and their brains are working properly. Then they start seeing, okay, well, that was bullshit. What else is bullshit?
That's right.
And they start looking into things, which is a very, very important thing to do, and a very responsible thing to do. It's a very civically responsible thing to do. One of the, in Australia, there's a law here, which I find honestly criminal, where it's like you are required to vote. You have to vote or you get fined like $150, $200. You have to vote, right? So, again, Thomas Sowell said one of the most civically responsible things that you can do sometimes is stay home on election day if you don't know what the hell you're voting on. Don't just vote randomly. You need to think about this. You need to study it. You need to study the candidates, study the topics, study the issues, and study the policies, or you cannot make an intelligent, informed, adult, mature, civically responsible decision. And yet here and presumably elsewhere, they're requiring that you do just that. And so I think that's absolutely crazy. And so what that does is that breeds a government that does not have to win on policies and actions, and can win on feelings and emotions and propaganda campaigns. And so that is a very dangerous place to go as well.
I totally agree with you. That is, wow, that is beyond the pale. I can't understand how people can be compelled to a responsibility. That's not really clear to me. I understand civic responsibility. Personal responsibility is incredibly important, and we should foster personal responsibility. That's where we make our decisions from. If we're going to make good decisions, great. If poor decisions, they impact mostly us, right? Compelled voting?
Well, that's the thing, voting didn't used to be a right or a responsibility. It was a privilege. And you only privileged few were able to vote. But that thing is, those privileges came with responsibilities. And so you had skin in the game. So you couldn't just vote just because you were a white male. No, you had to own a specific amount of property, and this was all about land rights, right? So, and so you're voting on land rights. You're voting on what's happening with the land, and you are a stakeholder. It's like you don't get to vote in an IBM, shareholders meeting if you don't own shares, right? So that's the same idea with voting on what we do with the land, right? But it was more than that. You were now responsible for defending, maintaining, and upholding your country and your land. So if you decided you wanted to vote and be able to vote, you were automatically now eligible for the draft. You could not be drafted if you were not a voting citizen. So it was only those horrible, greedy, rich white males who were able to be conscripted into armies, right? And you had to be part of your local militia and defend against invading, enemies and things like that. And then during the 1800s and 1700s, when there was wars going on and raids with, Native Americans and the American Indian Wars, that was a real thing. That was a real threat. And also you had to be part of the fire brigade. And so you had to go around putting out fires. And during the women's suffrage movement in the late 1800s, there was something like 76% of women did not want the vote. They said, hey, look, this is a household vote. Our household votes. My husband and I discuss the issues, we discuss candidates, and then he goes and places our vote. And if I go and get the vote, like I don't want to have to, go to war and die in a fire. No, thank you. Like I don't want the responsibilities that come with the privilege. And so they said, no, we'll get rid of all those responsibilities, which I think was a terrible idea. I think it's a terrible idea. Now you can talk about what land responsibilities and things like that. I think that you necessarily have to have skin in the game. You have to say like, okay, this is important enough to me that I'm willing to risk my life for this. And so if you're going to do that, you are much more likely to be a responsible voter. You're going to think about the issues. You're not just going to risk your life and, yeah, whatever, just all down the party line. You don't do that. That's dumb. It's foolhardy. So I think that getting away from the responsibilities that went along with the voting was a pretty bad idea.
Absolutely agree 110%, dude. And thanks for the civics lessons because a lot of people are unaware of these responsibilities as they were enumerated so long ago, because honestly, they're just not taught anymore.
Yeah, they
You
used
gotta
to.
know.
They weren't taught to me as a kid. I had to learn those myself.
Yeah.
But my mom, she was like second grade, they went through the Bill of Rights and they was just like, these are really important. And they went through and talked about all of them and what they meant in the Constitution and all these sorts of things. I never was taught that. And it's not like I went to bad schools, right? It's just they just don't teach that. It's not in the curriculum anymore, and it's really not in the curriculum now. I mean, so when I was going through high school was in the 90s, and so that was much longer ago, but it wasn't even taught then. I mean, I remember like coming across some workbooks and like textbooks of my uncle's when he passed away. We went through some of his things, and I was like, "Oh, what's this?" And it was like a Latin workbook for learning Latin. And my mom said, "Oh, that was your Uncle Peter's second grade Latin textbook." I'm like, second grade? They were teaching him Latin in second grade? I was like, "Yeah, you learn Greek and Latin, and starting in like first and second grade." I'm like, what the hell are we doing now as far as our education? It is just crap. You don't get any Greek and Latin. Yeah. I mean, you'd have to study that, as like a university course. And I mean, when I went to university, I was already plugged in as pre-med, but I always wanted to learn Greek and Latin. I was waiting to learn Greek and Latin all through school. Like, when does it happen? When does it happen? When does it happen? Never happened. And then I got to college and, I just sort of didn't think about it. But I mean, I'm sure I probably could have taken them then, but I had other interests at that time that were more pressing. But that was something that was very commonly done. You learn the classics. There's a classical education. You read the Odyssey. You read Odysseus. You read Ovid. You read Thucydides. You read Sophocles. So these are important parts of an education. They really are. I mean, people, there's just dead white guys wrote this sort of stuff. Okay. but they wrote some pretty profound things. And and it would do everyone well to learn this stuff and to read this stuff, even if it's in the English translation. But either way, I mean, even just education for education's sake is amazing. And just going through the mental, the mental sort of gymnastics to learn Greek, ancient Greek and Latin, learn languages that aren't spoken anymore. That's going to teach your brain structure and function that's going to be applicable to so many other things throughout your life. And so it's it's certainly worth doing. But yeah, we are just not teaching people real education anymore, and we're dumbing things down, and people are graduating without being able to read or do math at a 12th grade level. So how are you giving them a 12th grade diploma if they can't do math or read at a 12th grade level? And then you're sending them into college, you're just sending them in to fail. And then more and more and more freshmen coming into university are having to take these sub 100 level classes that are, for people who don't understand what that is, in other countries besides America, those are classes that are not up to university level. And so you have to take these classes just to catch you up. And a larger and larger and larger percentage of students are having to take these classes just to get up to university speed while they're at university than ever before. And so that's not helping these kids. That's not helping anyone succeed in their life. If the pretense is to actually educate them, that is not being fulfilled by any stretch of the imagination. And if you're just giving people A's and passing them doesn't give them an education, that doesn't put the education, just giving somebody a piece of paper. You can buy a PhD from Indonesia or something like that, and just be like, I have a PhD, look at this. You can just pay for it, but that's not actually going to instill and impart that knowledge in your head. And so we are really doing a major disservice to people, and we are robbing them of happiness and success and individual or independent or just independence, being strong, independent people. And I think that's probably, again, by design. If you are not strong, if you are strong and independent, you don't need the government, and you don't need someone to baby you and take care of you. And so if you're not educated, if you're reliant on welfare and food stamps and other government programs, then you are beholden to the government, and you just want the government to keep going. And then now you have these unearned voting rights and that haven't come with no strings attached. And now you don't have skin in the game. And so, if everyone has property and pays taxes except you, and you're allowed to vote on property and tax rates, what are you going to do? Well, it doesn't affect me, right? Why, people that don't pay taxes are voting on the tax rate and what we should do with the taxes. And so they say, yep, high as hell and give it to me. Like, what else would you do? It'd be stupid not to, like you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you didn't, and so that's what people do. Of course, that's what people do.
Well, of course it is what they do. And then it's a perpetuated cycle. And we wonder, did we actually vote for this? Because there's some evidence out there that maybe yes, maybe no.
No, we didn't vote for this. No, but we voted for people that did this. Or, through judicial activism, forced this, because that was illegal too, and forcing, judges to say, yep, this is completely unconstitutional, but I'm going to say it's constitutional. Now it's in precedent. And now stare decisis says, nope, now you have to just keep saying that this is constitutional forever. And that's wrong. I mean, even like, I think Judge Alito, was it Alito, said that? And he just said, oh, we should just, precedent's there, we should just stick to it. That's completely wrong. I mean, if that was there, we'd still have, like, Dred Scott and, Brown versus Board of Education. Those, we still have these very bad decisions in place. And so, no, you don't just go by precedent. Something's wrong, something's unconstitutional, you turn it the hell over. And so that's just common sense,
Common sense, not too
Not so
common
common
these
anymore.
days.
But but Leo was not a dumb guy, and he wasn't like you know, and he was of the the decisions he was making are more in of the conservative nature, and so but that sort of thing, just go with precedent, even if it means we keep slavery involved. I'm like, no, that's no, of course not, and he wouldn't think that either, But I think he's just speaking more generally. Like if you have a decision, just sort of go with it. But no, of course, you decide everything on its own merit. That's where it comes down to.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Dr. Chaffee, that has this has been a fantastic meetup.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I've enjoyed it.
I've enjoyed it quite a lot. Well, one thing I wanted to touch on was about mineralization. Yeah.
Okay.
I've noticed in my own health journey through carnivorism that a lot of my bone surfaces have felt different. Yeah, including my teeth. The pain in my teeth has reduced quite a lot. And it's not 100% gone, but then I've got some rather bad teeth in some parts. But I have noticed an enhancement to my bone structures. Like my fingers feel better, they feel harder and stronger, And I wanted to touch on that just a little bit. What do you know about mineralization and specifically about tooth recovery?
Well, I don't know too much about teeth. I mean, I have spoken to dentists, and the current accepted wisdom is that you can't really do much for enamel that doesn't regrow. I don't know. We'll see. But I do know that we say that in medicine as well, and that orthopedic surgeons will get taught and tell others that you mineralize your bones up until the age of around 25, and then it's no more. You're not going to get more bone mineralization after that, or bone density. You build up a certain amount of bone density by 25, and then it's just all downhill from there. Never really bought that one because I've never seen, an osteoporotic giraffe, it's just snapping its leg and just falling on the savannah, or a lion in the same regard, teeth falling out and all these sorts of things. They don't lose their teeth. They don't have crooked teeth, and they don't get osteoporosis. And, maybe they die young, sure. But, do you see that in zoos either? No. So, well, at least in zoos where they actually feed them what they're supposed to eat, which is not always the case. And when that doesn't happen, they feed them something else, they actually can get quite unwell. And that's another sign and marker that this comes down to our food. Another thing comes down to our food. There are disorders in livestock medicine and veterinary medicine that we call them diseases or disorders, but they come from eating the wrong plant, that the plants that they aren't naturally evolved to eat. So like big head, limp neck, crazy cow syndrome, big tongue, all these sorts of things. As far as I understand it, big head comes from oxalate poisoning and damage. And so oxalates can strip out calcium out of your serum, binds it, makes calcium oxalate stones. 75% of kidney stones are calcium oxalate stones. These are from plants. These are plants' defense chemicals. They can sort of can metabolize some things into oxalates as well, but they're well within the threshold of what we can deal with a day. We can deal with 100, 150 milligrams of oxalates a day, and we would make 10, 20 or so milligrams maximum, right? And so, but if you're taking in a lot of oxalates from plants, that's a problem. And so in cows, bovine animals, they eat these things with oxalates, stripping out a lot of calcium out of their system. That'll stop your heart. If your calcium goes too low, your heart stops. And so you get tetany in your heart and just shuts off, cramps up completely, doesn't pump anymore. And so don't want that. So your body starts having to replace this calcium where your best resource for calcium, which is your bones, and you start demineralizing your bones. Your osteoclasts go in there and start tearing down bone to get this calcium the hell out and into your system. And so you don't die. And then, and then they sort of get off that or on that, off that, on that. And all of a sudden they get remodeling and reshaping of their bone structure in their face. And it's sort of, there's bone starts getting growing big and lumpy and weird. It's called big head.
Wow.
And that comes from this remodeling of their bones due to oxalate poisoning or oxalate exposure. So presumably the same thing can happen to us. I do sort of wonder if people with Paget's syndrome, Paget's disease, which is a really weird thing where they have this big thickening of bone, but it's also weakened at the same time. So it's weakened and strong and rebuilding all these sorts of things. It sounds eerily similar to big head in cows. And there's a lot of things that are similar as well. So there's muscular dystrophy exists in cows as well, but it's not considered considered a genetic issue. Now it's called something else. I forget the name, but it's, from the vets and the ranchers I've spoken to, like it's the equivalent of muscular dystrophy in cows. And that's not just a genetic issue. Oh yeah, well that cow just has it. Oh well. It actually is a nutrient deficiency, I believe selenium. And so they don't get enough selenium and then they get muscular dystrophy. Okay, Jesus Christ. I mean, is this what we're doing? We're getting nutrient deficiencies, and people that have the genetic predisposition for muscular dystrophy are now expressing this because they're eating the wrong things. Well, other diseases come about exactly like that, like autoimmune issues, or people that are susceptible to these sorts of things, and they eat plants and they get these autoimmune issues, and then they stop eating the plants and the autoimmune issues go away. So that's nutritional. So it could be that there's other things as well. So maybe Paget's disease and maybe muscular dystrophy as well. We don't know, but I have my suspicions. And so that, is an example of what we know there's remodeling that goes on because of these defense chemicals, at least in cows. And but it does that to us too, presumably, because oxalates will strip out calcium from our bone, from our body as well, and we'll start losing mineralization. Now, orthopedic doctors and doctors in general will say you build your bone density up to 25, and then you just desperately try to hold on from there, and you cannot build it up from there. Why would that make sense? Why would we just shut off our physiology to build up bone density and mineralization, and we just lose that capacity? I mean, maybe, but it's a bit weird, and it's very questionable to me. And so something would have to change anyway. You'd have some sort of imbalance, or something would be going on, right, to make your osteoclasts and osteoblasts not build and break down in proper balance. And so that always seemed weird to me. But I have seen in real life people in their 40s who were vegan and just destroyed their body, became very borderline osteoporotic or had osteoporosis in middle age, and went onto a carnivore diet, what they're supposed to eat anyway, not all that much calcium in it, and yet their bone density starts going up. And they get back into from nearly, there's a lady I had on my podcast, Claire. She was vegan for a number of years. She was very anorexic, which can go hand in hand with people who go on a plant-based diet. Sometimes they do it in order to perpetuate their anorexia. Some people go that way and then become anorexic afterwards. But either way, she was anorexic and she was eating vegan, and she was very sick and very unwell and very underweight. Her BMI was like 9, which is, my BMI is 30, so I'm technically obese, even though I have low body fat percentage. So it's not perfect. But, if someone has a BMI of 9, they are really, really, really skinny. Mm-hmm. And so, dangerously so. And she actually died in the hospital. She died from a flu. Her body just couldn't fight it off. They had to resuscitate her, but she had an arrest and they had to resuscitate her. But she was down for 6 minutes, and thankfully she got back. They started feeding her through a tube, and it was like, okay, you have to get animal proteins. You cannot just be plant based. Like you need real nutrients. And so she was like a bit miffed by that, but she went with it, and she started eating a more normal diet. And she said that she was existing for a year, but she wasn't living. Mm-hmm. And then she came across a carnivore diet, and she started doing carnivore. And she said that was the first time I felt like I was alive again. Wow. And she started putting on weight, started regaining her health. And she improved from nearly osteoporosis. So she was right borderline for having osteoporosis at 39. And in 1 year of a carnivore diet, she went and exercised. She was doing resistance training, which can stimulate bone growth. She was now borderline normal. So big switch in just 1 year at 39 years old. So this is completely outside of what is expected to happen, but no one's eating a proper diet anymore. And so we don't know what the human body is supposed to do. We don't know our capabilities. We don't know what it's supposed to look like, what normal aging is supposed to look like, because no one's doing it, right? And so, you have to glean this information from other places, such as different native populations that are mostly eating meat, or some still exclusively eating meat, although those are getting more and more rare. But we do have documentation from different anthropologists and researchers and explorers from, decades and centuries ago, and studies being done on these populations as well over the past 100 years plus. So, we do know that these sorts of diseases that we're treating nowadays didn't exist in these populations, but when they were only eating meat, but now they're eating what we're eating. Now they have all these problems. And so it's it's something that I think we as doctors really need to take a hard look at and say, like, okay, maybe our body isn't supposed to run like this. Maybe it's only running like this because we're doing something wrong that is new. We're just assuming that, we're so smart, we would have noticed everything, and just people born before, they just wouldn't, they're intelligent enough to find all these things out. And so now we're seeing all these things that were always there, but that doesn't make sense, because every decade we go, all of these diseases are getting more and more and more prevalent, and if there were all these people with all of these diseases, where are all the old people that have them? Right? Where are the 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds that have autism? If autism was in the same rate now as it was 100 years ago, or 100 years ago as it is now, or 80 years ago, 50 years ago, where are all those older adults that have these same learning difficulties?
That is an excellent question.
And so, these problems are new, and they're only getting worse, which means it's environmental. And so we have to think differently. If you're trying to treat a disease and you're trying to give a pill for a disease, but the problem isn't a disease, it's a toxicity or malnutrition, you're treating it the wrong way. If you have lead exposure, lead poisoning, the treatment for that is not a pill. The treatment for that is get the hell away from anything that is exposing you to lead. That's first and foremost. Then maybe you have some chelating agent or something like that to get rid of that lead in your body. But the first thing you do is get the hell away from lead. And so we have this exposure relationship with food. And so we're getting exposed to this food, which we're not designed to process and utilize properly. And we're not getting all the nutrients that we need in the proportions and amounts and supply that we need it. And so our bodies aren't working properly, and we're treating it wrong. We're trying to give a pill for that. There's no pill that's going to fix that. The only thing that's going to fix that is eating properly and getting away from the exposure.
Well, I find that I totally agree with you. And that's why I've also personally tried to get as far away from those exposures as I can.
Definitely.
Dr. Chaffee, I thank you very much for coming on with me today and for telling us so many fantastic and fabulous things.
Yeah, well, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, this is Dr. Anthony Chaffee on Bold Carnivore, and be bold, everybody.
From pain to gain, I changed the game. Carnivore life, never the same. Standard diet filled with lies, I see through the disguise.